Hello, listeners, and help me welcome our former. Can we start over again?
We sure can. Hold on a second.
Hello, listeners, and help me welcome Bill O'Brien, former Speaker of the House and now candidate for the Senate of the United States.
Carl, you're generous to have me back again. It's so much fun to come here and talk with you.
Well, you're an interesting person, Bill. I've enjoyed back in 2011 and 12 when you were Speaker, and I was Assistant Vice Chair. And we did a lot there. We did a whole bunch of things with the legislature, setting up the voting districts and everything.
We had accomplished a lot, had a real good time doing it. I think we served the people of New Hampshire well. We did big things and small. I mean, we were able to close an $800 million deficit without increasing any taxes or fees. We reduced taxes and fees, as a matter of fact. And then the fun was, we caught the Health and Human Services Department taking $1 million from the federal government to set up an Obamacare exchange. We know it now. Certainly, it didn't work. We knew then it wouldn't work. So, if you remember, we passed a bill sending money back to the federal government, saying, "Pay down your debt." So we had some good times.
Well, yeah, and it was a friendly time. We had discussions, and sometimes I didn't agree with you, and you listened to my argument, and sometimes you accepted it, and sometimes you didn't. But I felt that you were a very reasonable person to talk to. You listened to me.
I remember doing an interview after I was Speaker, just as things were finishing up, and a fairly liberal reporter asked me, said, did you ever feel you have to reach across party lines, across the aisle? And I said, one of the things that you folks didn't realize, that with my party having 3/4 of the New Hampshire House, there were many aisles. and there's a lot of reaching that had to be done. And I will tell you that we certainly did. I can remember one instance where we tried to reach across the aisle, and I think you might be aware of it, Carl, is when we were putting together the budget. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services came to us and said, "Oh, this deal we'd worked out, some years back with the Medicaid enhancement tax, and you guys were charging it wrong, and then saying you're collecting money you never really kept, and they never intended to keep, in order to get more disbursements." It's about a $40 million, I think it was, penalty you should have paid.
Large number.
And all of a sudden they came out of the blue and said, "Well, you have to pay it now." And so we reached across the aisle. In that case, I tried to reach across the aisle to even then Senator Jeanne Shaheen, and I said, I wanted to talk with her and say, we need your help in Washington, the people of New Hampshire, not Bill O'Brien, not the Republicans. The people of New Hampshire need your help because we have this huge deficit, and we can't be adding another $40 or $50 million to it. And reaching across, she never took my hand. She never would return the call, would never take the call. Carl, I asked my staff to call her staff. They wouldn't take the call. I even went to Democrat leadership in the House, minority leadership at that point, and said, "Hey guys, why don't you go tell her about the problem? You and she work out the solution. Just call up CMMS, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, see if they'll change their position. It's real important to the people of New Hampshire." And she wouldn't do it because she was so afraid of doing something for Republicans. She doesn't see anything other than in a through a partisan prism. So you can reach across the aisle. With Jeanne Shaheen, typically when you reach across the aisle, your hand is slapped away.
Yeah. Well, you can see that nowadays. I mean, it's even worse, I think. All Republicans and Democrats are not being able to do anything.
It's unfortunate. This rhetoric has become
Yeah.
so extreme. You can't be calling people a Nazi all the time because you disagree with them and assume that they're going to stand up and receive more. You can't do that. You can't, for example, when the president is defending the country from a terrorist who is wearing the uniform of essentially an enemy country, a country that would admit that it's been at war with America, Iran, for 40 years. The president has decided we're not going to let him do any more of this. He's killed 600 U.S. Soldiers in Iraq. We're not going to let him do any more of this. And he takes out that enemy. You can't be calling him, as they have, somebody akin to Adolf Hitler. That just isn't going to work for our country.
And I know, as you said in the beginning, you do work across the aisle, at least attempt to work across the aisle when they're receptive, and you can work out certain problems. You have to give a little to get a lot.
Yeah, I mean, unlike Jeanne Shaheen, apparently, then and now, one of the things I probably said it to you because it was kind of a reasonable thing to say. I said, I'll meet with anybody. As Speaker of the House, I'll meet with anybody in my office. The only thing I have to be assured of is they won't do physical violence. But I was meeting with the folks who I knew had opposed us, would oppose it. The state teachers, the state employees union had done everything they could to make sure that the Democrats were elected, the firefighters union. But we met with them and said, where can we reach common ground? How can we do something for the people of New Hampshire? Jeanne Shaheen should be doing that in the nation. You know what she does instead? According to the National Federation of Independent Businesses, she votes against small business 80% of the time. New Hampshire is a state of small businesses.
Yeah.
She's voting against us in what makes New Hampshire a strong economy. 80% of the time.
Sure.
According to the liberal website 538, it's one that the Democrats pay attention to, they were praising her as being among the top 10 most loyal Democrat senators in Congress, and that's not.
And loyalty meaning they'll go along with what the boss
loyalty
says.
to this extreme agenda, loyalty to Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, loyalty to the crazy left who is saying, for example, we can't pass a Born Alive Act that would do nothing more than say, doctors, hospital, keep children alive when they're born alive. If they survive an abortion, we don't allow them to die. And she voted against that. She knows better, but she doesn't care better.
I think that this is going to be something in the election that you're bringing it up, but I assume that that's going to be a high value thing that the media will pick up on too.
Well, I think the people of New Hampshire should be outraged. America deserves better from New Hampshire than to have a member of Congress, a U.S. Senator, who would vote that way. We deserve better representation than Jeanne Shaheen. And you look at her and you say, well, what has she ever done for New Hampshire? What has she done for a country? There's no signature piece of legislation that she's worked on.
But she gets in a picture in the paper a lot.
She does. When the federal government comes to the point of enacting a program and they start doing the handouts, they'll call up senators and say, Senator Shaheen, you want to announce, 30 million, 40 million for opioid and addiction assistance, and it's good we have that, and anybody a member of Congress ought to work hard for it. She didn't work hard for it. She just got the press release to hand out. I'll tell you what she did work hard for. In 2016, she put an amendment. She tried to put an amendment on the appropriations bill, and this amendment would have directed the Social Security Administration to inform the Gun Check Background Board of anyone that the Social Security, any recipient that the Social Security Administration had determined as having financial difficulties. It was essentially a backdoor red flag law.
Really?
This is Jeanne Shaheen. So all the folks who are on in the years and getting Social Security, if they can't be continually pleasing to the Social Security Administration, they could be reported. All the disabled people who have to rely on Social Security payments for their livelihood, and in many cases it's not much, so sure they're going to have financial difficulties, would be reported to the gun. Fortunately, that didn't happen.
Good.
But that's
Yeah.
basically Jean Shaheen. That's what she's doing down there as one of the most top 10 liberal progressive senators in the whole country.
And progressive is really not progressive. It's a wrong tag to put on those people.
No, it's regressive.
That's right.
Yeah, the way they try to take our freedoms away is something that regresses to a point earlier than the founders who handed on this glorious legacy to us.
And socialism is not the way that New England or New Hampshire especially is oriented. I don't know why people are thinking along that line. People in New Hampshire want to work and want to make choices for themselves.
We have to get out there, as unfortunately doesn't seem to be occurring in the schools, and talk to young people about what socialism is. Somebody told me something last night about a great analogy for socialism. He said there was a professor who went to his class and said, we're going to have socialism in this class when it comes to grades. So I'm going to look at the average of everyone's grade and I'm going to assign it to all of you. So I'll grade my papers and you all get the average. And so the first paper came out and everybody got a B. Well, of course, the people who had worked hard and got A's, they weren't too happy. But, you know, all the B's, they didn't care. And all the otherwise C's and D's, they were pretty happy with that. And then they took another test and the grade was in the C's because, you know, the people who were in the A's and B's figuring, it doesn't make any difference. I'm just going to get what's there anyway. Why work hard? So they didn't. The grades started. By the time they were in the third and fourth test, the grades were in the D's because, you know, no one was working hard. It made no difference anymore.
Yeah.
That's socialism by example. That's what an economy would be. If they're going to take everything extra that you work so hard for away from you, well, you're not going to work hard. You know, it reminds me of what I heard when I was a child in Germany. Has been repeated many times. I lived in Germany with my dad, who was in the U.S. military, and we spent about 4 years there. And we met because I'm old enough to have been there while there were still refugees from East Germany. We met refugees from East Germany. And they would say, repeating obviously what a lot of them were saying, which is, you know, in our country that we just left, we pretended to work and they pretended to pay us. That is socialism. Because there's no, if you're going to get the same pay, why work? Pretend to work.
Right.
And we see you know, it has its humorous elements, that grading example, that person's remark, but the real life example is that it has to be coercive in the end. It has to choose bad elements. And so you end up doing what Lenin did Vladimir Lenin did in Ukraine, where you start killing people. They figure that the Holodomor, and I ask people, your viewers, to look it up, the Holodomor killed 5 million Ukrainians in order to get rid of undesirable elements, or Mao's Red China, which killed tens of millions of Chinese.
And they're still doing it.
And they're still doing it. They figured that in the 20th century, over 100 million people died because of socialism. And the excuse is always, well, they didn't implement it correctly. They didn't. No, at its core. Well, at its core, it can be implemented correctly, and correctly means it's going to be more coercive. You know, is it not enough to look at Venezuela, where they took the richest country in South America, a country that by some estimates has second or the most oil reserves in the world for any country. And they've driven it into the point of where the people are starving. I'm not sure of the current figure, but last year they were talking about how the average Venezuelan lost 17 pounds because of starvation. That is what socialism is.
And how many people have left there? I mean,
Well, I hope my figures are correct, and I stand to be corrected, but I remember that hearing that about a third of Venezuelans have left the country, have escaped. You know, it reminds me of what East Germany had to do, which is put up a wall. And, you know, and as a child, I saw that wall, not just in East Berlin, but in East Germany. You know, my dad was, as I said, in the military. So when I was about 12 years old, a little bit younger, 11 years old, he was assigned to Fulda, Germany. Now, some of your viewers are aware that there was something called the Fulda Gap. And if you had a big Russian army
Right.
in Eastern Europe and you wanted to be able to get to Frankfurt and on to Paris really quickly, and you had a bunch of tanks to do it, you had to go through the Fulda Gap from Central Germany, Central Europe, because that's where your tanks could operate. And so the U.S. military put a military unit right at the head of the gap. It was about 10 kilometers or so, maybe a little bit more from the East German border. It's the 14th Armored Cavalry, and that's where my dad was stationed. And so when we got there, I think he knew a little bit about me at that point. So he said, "Bill," he said, "there's a rule that they have here, and the rule is you're not supposed to go as a dependent, you're an American dependent. You're not supposed to go within 5 kilometers of the East German border." And so, I was 11 years old and I had a bicycle. So as soon as the opportunity offered itself, I drove as close as I could to look at it. And I'll tell you what I saw. I saw a border that did have a wall, had fence, it had electrified fencing, not a barrier fence, a killing fence. I saw a border that on the internal side of it had plowed fields laid with mines. I saw armed guards. I saw, I don't know if they're East German or Soviet tanks facing in, all to prevent the people from leaving.
Yeah.
Again, reminds me of another remark made by the East German leader at the time. I think his name was Erich Honecker. And it was after there was an uprising, people forget this, in 1953 in East Germany, East Berlin particularly. And someone said, "Well, look, if this is the socialist paradise, why are all your people, leaving, and there's an uprising and riots and everything?" And he said, "I guess we just got to get another people." And that's what it always takes, is another people to socialists. We see the Democrats, unfortunately, on the national level, doing that now. They're trying to have open borders to get another people.
Right.
Because Americans are understanding that this free market system works well for them. And so they have to get another people.
So we got to get away from some of these socialistic things, and we have to be careful about how people are thinking of these being such a benefit to the people. They're spending more money than they could. The funny thing to me is they complain about how much we owe our debt, and yet they keep on planning more money that's going to double what we owe.
Anyone who's paying attention hears some of the proposals that they are coming up with, trillions and trillions of dollars. For this Medicare for all, I think I read that it would cost like 35 trillion, was it, over the next 10 years? Heavens, our federal budget, bad as it is only 4 trillion a year compared to that, and we're not even getting into reparations yet, and we're not getting into free, quote free, obviously nothing is free, money comes from somewhere, education. It just doesn't add up. My fear is that folks, and I see this unfortunately with some of the younger generation, are responding to the free, responding to an understanding of socialism being, I get something free.
Yeah.
And they don't go beyond that to say, where does this come from? What will this lead to? Look at what we've been able to do just with a slight adjustment of the regulations and the market, and reintroducing a few more free market solutions, such as lower taxes, under Donald Trump. We now have a 3.5% unemployment rate. It just came out again today that the rate is at a historic low. It's 50 years since we last had that rate. It's at historic lows for people of Hispanic background, African Americans. The stock market is up, and that's not just the plutocrats. That's everybody's pension plans. If you have a 401k or a pension plan, or if you're like the state of New Hampshire and you're trying to fund these retirement plans you put together for for public employees.
how much?
It's up 58%.
They need that too.
58%.
They were in the hole so much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, they do. I mean, you and I worked on that. I mean,
Yeah.
the problem hasn't gone away, but it's ameliorated quite a bit. It really is with that kind of, and it's due to free markets, not due to socialism. Socialism would kill us.
And a lot of the programs that the people are praising aren't really as stable as they think they are. I mean, you heard about Medicare and what they have and how much in fraud goes through. There's something that 60 Minutes looked into 3 or 4 years ago, and I haven't heard corrections. They had a third of the money that was going into Florida was going to crooks.
That's just amazing. I hadn't heard that, Carl.
Yeah,
That's
that was
just amazing.
documented. What they were doing is, just getting claims and paying them without checking them. No full audit of the operation, and a lot of stuff was going to post office boxes, which wound up the address was just an empty store.
I don't want to distract me, but post office reminds me of that story I heard about the IRS sending, I think it was over 1,000 income tax refund checks to an address with the same address in like Estonia, Lithuania. I mean, that's government. I mean, it's if you are and your listeners are dealing with their own resources, they're careful. If they have a checkbook, they watch what's in the checkbook. They're watching where things are going. Some of us are better at it than others, but you take care. If you're dealing with other people's money, if you're dealing with taxes, unfortunately, there's a tendency to say these are just figures. It's not so important. If a third of the money being sent to Florida by Medicare is fraudulent, well, 2/3 is taking care of people. You engage in these mental exercises that, in the end, destroy these programs. And these programs generally don't work. I mean, one of the reasons our healthcare cost is so high today is because of government involvement in it. I sat with a fellow who runs one of the surgical centers in New Hampshire. And I talked about medical costs, and he said, "Bill, one of the things you should be aware of, and it is really points us to a solution." He says, "I do a couple of things here. My team does a couple of things here that aren't covered by insurance. One of them is plastic surgery. Generally, it's not. And then LASIK surgery. Generally, it's not. And he said, not only has the price of LASIK surgery not gone up in the last 10 years, it's plummeted because there's competition." And similarly with plastic surgery, the price hasn't gone up in 10 years. That we need more competition. It's been a 75 or 80-year journey that took us to this point. Since
it takes so long for them to realize that it's a simple thing. You don't give a monopoly to an operation that doesn't check itself.
Exactly.
And how do they think that works? How many of these programs that have no real checking system in there, if they operated the credit cards the way, the credit cards have less than 1%.
Do you remember when I was speaker that we went to the Department of Agriculture's representatives who run the food stamp program, and we said, I've been able to talk a company into doing a free check of welfare payments in New Hampshire. And we've found that probably about 80 of the limited group we found, about 80 of them didn't live in the state and or were receiving benefits from 2 different states. We found one person who had just bought a Cadillac, another person owns a condominium down in Miami that is worth approaching $1 million. Now, you want to participate in this program? And essentially they said, we don't care. It's not authorized. We don't care. That's unfortunately what government is like. And I must say, under Obamacare, I think they were being under President Obama, I think they were being judged by the expansion of these programs, unlike Donald Trump, who says, we shouldn't put people on a welfare plantation. We should be allowing them to stand on their own 2 feet. Food stamps is good. We don't want people to starve. The WIC program, the Women in Infants and Children program, they're good. We don't want people to not be fed nutritious food. but we have to be always thinking of how do we move them beyond this? How do we
That's right.
give them the ability to stand on their own 2 feet? Because we know that the best welfare you can ever have is you taking care of your family, you taking care of yourself as a husband and wife, caring for a family and earning a living. For
I
the
think we've
family.
forgotten how to do that. Bill, we're running out of time. With all these little things that we ran, I shouldn't say little things, they're pretty big things. What do you think is the biggest thing that, when elected, you want to go after?
There's a number of very important things. I certainly want to support President Trump and all that he's doing, particularly his judicial appointments. If I will be if I am sent to Washington, and I will be, I will be voting against any impeachment articles against President Trump, because we know that if God forbid we don't take back the House, Republicans don't, they'll just keep this up. They'll
Oh,
just
that's
keep
right.
this craziness going. And so I make a commitment that I will vote against them, and that's important. I truly, on a personal level, want to work in Washington for what I spent so much time in Concord, which is fiscal responsibility. You know, we just have this huge public debt. It exceeds the whole economy at this point. We don't seem to be able to do anything other than continually pass off our bills, our government bills, to future generations. That has to stop. We're robbing them of their future. I want to give them back their future. I want us to start paying our own way, so we don't have to continue to pass on these debts to our children.
So you want them to have a good budget, too.
They don't budget anymore. They say
That's
they
it.
pass appropriation bills, and sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes it's just continuing
Ridiculous.
resolutions.
There's no check on it.
Yeah, can you imagine? I mean, to our benefit as New Hampshire legislators, the first thing we'd sit down in every turn is come up with a blueprint for 2 years spending. They can't even come up with a blueprint for 1 year's spending.
2 months spending.
Yeah, continuing resolutions of 10 days. Craziness.
Well, Bill, thank you very much for your time, and we want you back again as you're going through your campaign. Maybe you'll get some ideas, some people where New Hampshire wants you to go.
Oh, I appreciate that, and Carl, I really appreciate having me on here. It's always so delightful.
Okay, very good, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.